Welcome everyone to another live chat here on the Long Beach API Facebook page. My name is Mike Guardabascio. I've been asked by the API to sort of help moderate tonight's conversation, which is what I'm really excited about. I think this is a conversation that's really central to the mission of the Long Beach API and what I know its organizers are kind of setting out to do and the work they want to do in the community. So I'm very excited to be joined by 14 API educators, mostly here in the city of Long Beach, but around Southern California as well. I think we have some expats who've moved out from Long Beach to the surrounding areas. So with no further ado, the way we're just going to start is we're going to go down the list, and I'm just going to have everyone give their name and share a little bit about their background and what they do, and then we'll get into some questions. Before we do that, if you have questions for any of our panelists or for our panelists as a whole, and you're watching on the Facebook, go ahead and leave that in the comments below the live stream. And then I think hopefully Knock or Angel will be able to shuffle those to me, or we'll find a way to get those questions out there as well. So, okay, so just to start, like I said, name and your background and what you do. Angel, can you start us off?
Hello everyone, and kumusta kayong lahat? My name is Angel Mikaele, and I'm a 5th grade teacher at Dooley Elementary. And yes, I rep Long Beach LBUSD. So hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for tuning in.
Okay, I think we're still waiting on Czarina. So Darlene, do you want to go next?
Oh, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Darlene Lee Wang. I'm a school counselor at Garfield Elementary School in Long Beach. Really happy to join in with all of you today.
And Daro?
Hi everybody, my name is Daro Huot, Cambodian. I've been a research analyst in the Office of Research and School Improvement for the last 12 years. Thanks for having us, Mike, and big fan of your work, by the way.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that. George?
Hi, good evening. My name is George Tsai. I am an administrator in the middle and K-8 schools office of Long Beach Unified School District.
Great, and Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly On. I'm the current director of leadership development with Long Beach Unified. And just a little bit about me, I've started my career in Long Beach actually as a college aide, and have had the privilege of interacting with many of you and across different levels in our system.
And now you're directing all of the leadership development.
Supporting.
You're supporting, okay. Michael?
Hi everyone, Michael Navia, Filipino American, and I am the principal at Renaissance High School for the Arts.
Great, Ruth?
Hi everyone, Hafaday. I'm Ruth Paris Ashley, and I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Education Services. And like Kelly, I have had my whole career here in Long Beach, and I was also born and raised in Long Beach.
Sam?
Hi everyone, Sam Koshy. I am currently the Director of Assessment, Research and Evaluation with Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. Before then, I taught at Poly. I was AP Physics teacher there, and then I transferred to being the AP coordinator. And then prior to that, I also did my teaching credential at Cal State Long Beach, and also my master's in physics there.
That's a lot. That sounds like a lot of work. I think, yeah, just being qualified to teach physics in and of itself is, that's quite a bit of work. Okay, Staci?
Hi everyone, I'm Staci Yamanishi. I'm a 6th grade ELA and intervention teacher at a charter school in Van Nuys.
Okay, Dao?
Hi, I'm Tel Vo, Vietnamese American, and I'm a 6th grade math teacher at Tincher and a proud product of Long Beach Unified.
Okay, and Tuan?
Hello everyone, Tuan Nguyen, I'm Vietnamese and Chinese American. I'm just gonna go backwards with my time frame because I am an educator, a community proud product of LBUSD. It's my 2nd year at Nelson Academy as an assistant principal. I was at Cabrillo for 15 years, and then before that I was a college aide for 4 years at Poly. And then just as a product of LBUSD, Garfield, Newcomb, Poly, LBCC, and Cal State Long Beach.
All right, Vincent?
All right, unmuting myself, the protocol I learned from Zooming with years of months and months of Zoom meetings. So hello everyone, my name is Vincent Puth, Cambodian American. I am the activities director at my alma mater, Long Beach Poly High School, and I'm a product of Long Beach Unified, of course, and I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you. And finally, Vanitha.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Vanitha Chandrasekhar, and I'm the Educational Technology Curriculum Leader in the Office of Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development. And I've spent my whole career in the Long Beach Unified School District, and I am proud to be here with everybody.
You know what? I don't think if I were some of you guys, I don't think I could even keep track of my titles. Some of you guys, what you guys are doing, it sounds so important. It's like, it's incredible. You've got extra long business cards. Okay, and I believe our last guest as well, Czarina, has joined us. Can you introduce yourself? Just share a couple sentences about who you are and what you do.
Yes, hello. Hi, I'm Czarina Jimenez, and I am an elementary music teacher in the Inland Empire.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got a few expats here. We have a few people who are in the surrounding areas and not just in Long Beach, but obviously I know a lot of our audience are in the LBUSD or around the LBUSD. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about that. My first question, which I'm going to pose to sort of most of our panelists, is something that Nak and I talked about quite a bit as she was explaining to me the goal of the API is there are so many different ethnicities and experiences within that collective that really are distinct, right? I mean, as you can hear, we have Polynesian teachers and Vietnamese and Cambodian, Indian, and so many different backgrounds. So my first question is just what role has your race and ethnicity played in your own schooling or in your work experience? And Angel, if you don't mind kicking us off with that question.
Sure. So one thing that sticks out being Samoan and Filipino is that going throughout as a student, so walking as a student throughout the school system, just having that craving of seeing people that look like me or people that speak the same language as me within the curriculum. And I remember very distinctly, like it was yesterday when I was in 5th grade, when we were reading Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I said, oh my gosh, guess what? I get to see someone that looks like me. And then, you know, unfortunately that wasn't the case, but just always yearning for that belonging, that and that connection within school. So that didn't happen for me until high school when I joined the Pacific Islander Club at Poly. Shout out to all the jackrabbits out there. But yes, that was when I was finally validated. So that kind of drives my work as an educator now, is in trying to really build those connections with our students in the classroom and making sure that the curriculum has their voices in whatever we're reading and what we're viewing, making sure that it reflects what's in my the students that are in my classroom.
That is very well said. What a great kickoff to the conversation. Darlene, do you have a couple thoughts you'd like to share?
Yes. So for me, my race and ethnicity, I'm Cambodian, Chinese American, but when I grew up, I didn't know that I was Chinese. I thought I was just Cambodian American because my family, we just valued the Cambodian culture. We spoke the language a lot. And then going to a school, I remember in elementary school being like one or the very few Asian Americans in my class. I just felt just very kind of isolated. I remember feeling confused and then misunderstood at times. People just pointed out I was Chinese or Vietnamese, and they really didn't know what Cambodian was. So for me, it was kind of a confusing time at the early ages, and it made it hard for me to like fit in, or also felt like to relate to other people, because I grew up just really learning a lot about my culture and around my grandparents. But as I grew up, I think the nice part about it is I've become to be more motivated, because you know I understood the value that my parents, my grandparents made sacrifices to get me here, how much they valued education. And it's very motivating to me because in high school, I realized that I was like one of the few Cambodian Americans going to like a 4-year college at the time, and then graduating and then going for my master's in school counseling. And now here as a school counselor, I get to motivate and encourage other Cambodian Americans and just all students in general that, you know, if I can do it, you can do it. So it's just very, I guess, I'm very grateful for the experience now.
That's great. Thank you. Daro?
I'd say, growing up Cambodian, I kind of knew firsthand that, we as Cambodians would definitely have to, like many API communities, would have to work harder for what we want in terms of like educational achievement. So like, knowing that firsthand, I saw that, in my father who, went to LBCC, and then he went on to graduate from Cal State Long Beach with an electrical engineering degree. But, wasn't easy, obviously. He had to like carry around, an American Heritage Dictionary with him everywhere he went, learning, the language, as well as just navigating the education system. So, so that definitely had, those educational values really, obviously, were very early on instilled in me, which kind of led me to focus on, at college, just focus on a lot of social issues by studying literature, sociology, and then eventually getting my credential in counseling, so that, what I do at work, what I do in the research office, I feel like the work really informs the work that is occurring, at the school site. So, that's definitely a real novelty for me.
Well, and obviously we're all grateful to have so many different kinds of experience in different places, right, around the district. I think that's great. George, you want to share a little bit?
Sure. I am a second generation Taiwanese American. I grew up in towns where if I tell people about it now, they're like, wait, people live there? Or the second question is, wait, Asians live there? So it was Urbandale, Des Moines, next to, or Urbandale, Iowa. And then it was Barstow, California. So
there's not a burgeoning Taiwanese population.
Exactly. So Asians were rare. So we would, definitely just try and, like grab support from each other. When I was thinking about this, I do want to share my screen just to kind of give you an example. This was normal for me where, when I look back at my yearbook and say, oh my gosh, I was just, called chink, and, it was just pretty blatant, and that was my normal. So what I did is I tried to deal with it in the best way I could. I envisioned using violence against the people. Luckily, I didn't do that. But with my personality, I try to use humor. I was a really quirky kid to begin with. You can see how quirky I am by the mullet that I wore in high school. So, things like that helped me kind of get through the Barstow childhood. I went to UCLA. It was a culture shock to see so many Asians. It was great. And from there, I took Asian American Studies. Throughout education, have been trying to just learn more about history and background, and then also advocate for underrepresented groups. So that's something that's really helped me kind of find that balance and come to terms with my identity, where I'm not quite fully the Asian enough, and at the same time I'm always seen as Asian, so that's good.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I think that's a deeper issue, and I know from having talked to a couple of people on the panel that you're certainly not the only person who's thought about that, being a next generation down. Ruth, you want to share a little bit?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Nok, for inviting me to be on this panel. I feel very honored. And for me to share about my race and ethnicity, a little bit about my story of growing up as a Chamorro person from Guam. My parents were from Guam, but I told you I was born and raised. And being a West Sider is also very important to me, because that is where I really, truly learned a sense of belonging. So growing up on the West Side in the 60s and 70s, I'm showing my age here, but those of you who know what Long Beach was like back then, it was very segregated. So we had a lot of Japanese families after World War II who was residing here. We had just as many white families as we had African-American families, Hispanic, Filipino, Romanian, Samoan, Tongan families, and it was beautiful. And like I said, that's where I learned a sense of community. So when I went off to college and to UC Santa Barbara, I was one of very few through the Equal Opportunity Program who was a student there. And that's when I realized I missed out on opportunities. And I had roommates and other friends in college who were in AP classes. And I was resentful because I didn't have that same opportunity that I wish I did. But if anything, it inspired me to work harder. And then I started teaching in Long Beach. And so when I was a Spanish bilingual teacher downtown Long Beach at Edison, people were speaking to me in Spanish, thinking that I was Mexican, Hispanic. When I started working at Lincoln as a vice principal, they thought I was Cambodian. A lot of people thought I was Cambodian, so they'd speak to me in Khmer. And that's when I really realized that our students and families, it's important for them to have somebody that looks like them so they can feel comfortable. And since 2004, since I've been in human resources, I've always valued that diversity, that sense of inclusion and equity in our staffing. So that's how it's really influenced me in my role.
Staci?
So I'm Japanese American and I grew up in Gardena. So there were a lot of other Japanese Americans around as well. And I feel like I was very fortunate because when I think back on my schooling experiences, I can count more than 10 API educators that I had. And I sometimes wonder how that influenced my being a teacher now. But as a student, I often, especially in middle school, I did see myself as a part of the curriculum. And I remember like feeling really validated, which kind of led to an increased sense of pride in my identity. There was a time when like my grandpa got to come in and be a guest speaker for everyone in the grade level. And that was a really valuable experience for me. And then as a teacher, being able to share my identity with my students and just having those conversations about diversity within Asian Americans is a conversation I've had to have a lot. And it's super important. And I think thinking about my own experiences as a student, I always work hard to encourage my students to embrace their own identities, to talk about them, to explore them, and to develop them.
That's great. Thao?
So I went to Roosevelt and then I went to Tincher where I'm currently teaching, and then I went to Poly. I didn't realize I was different from my peers, I guess, until I hit middle school, because my mom would compare me to my Caucasian friends, and she would tell me a lot like, hey, you know, we can't afford certain things like your friends do. So then that's when I realized like, wow, I am the only Asian person in my room, and I am the only Asian person in my group of friends. So I felt like I had to be more Asian, but I didn't even know what that meant. I continued to be myself, but I felt like, you know, going to Poly, then it was like a culture shock for me as well, like looking around like, wow, there's so many different types of ethnicities and, you know, SES levels there. So I just really appreciated the diversity there. And I was really shy. My mom just taught me to just speak when spoken to, and I think that kind of affects me today because I am afraid to kind of speak up in certain situations, especially the uncomfortable situations. But as far as work goes, I am a newer teacher, and I feel like not only being one of the few Asian teachers, but also being very petite, and I look like I'm 16. I feel like in the beginning of my career, I always feel like I have to prove people wrong because they think that I'm very soft-spoken and that I can't, you know, control the classroom. Until this day, I just feel like I have to prove people wrong, whether it's parents, admin. And then I talk and they're like, that came out of you? And I'm like, yeah, you know, and so I think what it is just to stress relationships, because that's a big focus that I have as a teacher. And it wasn't until 5th grade that I realized where my family comes, because my teacher encouraged me to go home and just ask, how did your family get to America?
Well, yeah, for sure. Okay, Tuan? Did we lose Tuan? Tuan, do you want to share?
Yeah,
Yes.
can you hear me? Gotcha. It definitely started when our parents had to flee their home country in Vietnam in '75. And, you know, it was the greatness of America in allowing our parents to come here with our cousin. And if it weren't for that opportunity, you know, our parents wouldn't have, you know, bore 9 kids. So with that, we are very thankful for that. Very thankful for the city of Long Beach that provided a home for us on the west side of Long Beach, and of course also LBUSD. But as I stood on the corner of 19th Street and Harbor when I was a young kid, and at this time, you know, we're moving into the 80s and 90s where things were a bit difficult at the west side. And I saw a bunch of just lots of different negativities that were happening on the west side. And of course, with the stigma, the connotations of what we saw that were happening with the different over there. And I just kind of stood on that corner and said, hey, how can I, you know, help my neighborhood? And, you know, one of the early ideas was maybe I could become a cop. That could probably help, you know, move our city forward. So with that, it's always kind of had that drive in me in terms of how do we move our community and our neighbors forward. You know, when we're younger, you know, we had those thoughts. We wish we could do this, wish we could do that, but we didn't have the resources, the networking. So now that we are in the position that we are, it's the drive is there every single day. And I love that, you know, LBUSD always considered the West Side as one of our gems, and for us to represent the West Side, there is that pressure. But every single day as we move forward, you know, we're here to support all of LBSD students, and it is a great opportunity. You know, it's you always find that silver lining, and the West Side is where the heart is. The roots lie there, and we continue to grow from there. So, so very blessed.
I've always felt like if someone gave me $10 million to make a documentary, I would want to make a documentary about Poly, as so many of you have shared about the experiences, your first experiences there and the thoughts you had coming out of that school, but also about the west side of Long Beach. You know, as Ruth mentioned, in the 60s and 70s, I mean, I think the legacy of that part of the city throughout the rest of the city and the school district is just a really great untold story for sure. So I appreciate you guys talking about that aspect of your background as well. Vincent, do you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, let's bring an East Side kid here because everyone's bringing up the West Side. And when I say East Side, you know, everyone's like, wait, what are you talking about? Milliken area? And I'm talking about Snoop Dogg East Side.
You're talking about the real East Side, not East Long Beach. The difference
Cambodia
between,
town.
Right.
Cambodia town. And I think that just segueing to that Cambodian town makes total sense to what we're all talking about here. And I think that's why this group is so powerful. And listening to what Ruth was talking about with the 60s and the 70s, one of the things that I learned as a student in Long Beach and just as a community member in Long Beach is that Long Beach have had a history of different groups coming into this country and just settling in Long Beach and embracing it, embracing all the woes, the struggles, you know, the hard times of trying to mesh community together, you know, because in the 90s, if you want me to be honest and keep it real, it was tough for Cambodian kids going to school, right? But one of the things that we realized was that when we went to the schools, Long Beach Unified embraced us. The city of Long Beach embraced us. I mean, you can start naming folks, you know, by, you know, those who are working the front line, like the Bonnie Lowenthos, you know, the Mark Basumio, you know, the Sean Ashley, I can go on and on and on with different names, right? And what's special is that none of those folks that I just mentioned are Cambodian, but yet they were advocates for Cambodian students. And you saw that. And so just talking about what Angel was talking about earlier, where like you're going through the different schools. You know, I went to Whittier and Rogers and then back to Poly. I was looking for a Cambodian educator, looking for somebody that looked like me, but I didn't really need to, because in that sense, I was being supported by Naomi Rainey, by, you know, Tony Rogers and so on, because they wanted me to succeed. I think the shock to me was when I went to college and realized dang, the world is not like this, you know, and especially being a Cambodian student, you know, being a Cambodian student in city of Long Beach, where we have the largest Cambodian population outside Phnom Penh, it's totally different when you're like, oh yeah, the city's embracing us. They know how to say Khmer right? They, you know, and they know that's the language of the Cambodian folks. And then you go out to, you know, Northern California, you go out to anywhere else, and they're just like, wait a minute, who are you guys? What part of the world are you guys from again? And so on. And I think so from my experience is understanding that we are in a city, in a district that's really valuable towards what they're doing for the kids of every group, like Tuan mentioned. But I think particularly in my experience, understanding that this is special. So when I was able to get the opportunity to come back to Poly and work in Long Beach Unified, it was like a homecoming of some sorts, and just realizing like this is exactly what, you know, when I was going through the schooling, what I was kind of training for, like this is my chance and I'm going to try to make the best out of it.
I would certainly never suggest that Long Beach is perfect or without its problems, or that the school district is, but I think everyone that I know from the city who went away to college can identify with that feeling of leaving the school district and getting into college and going, oh, this is very different, you know, compared to the way it was in high school or wherever I was, where there really everyone was, you know, kind of came together a little bit more. Vinitha, do you want to kind of close up our thoughts on this subject?
Sure, Mike. My situation is a little different. I grew up in India and I went to school out there, but I came and I joined the Long Beach Unified School District. And I started in the west side at Garfield. Darlene, right where you are right now, that's where I started. And I have to say Long Beach is an unusual district. Having lived overseas, lived in different countries and come here, this is a place where everybody is welcomed no matter where you are, whether it's as teachers, educators, staff members, or students. It's a welcoming city. And Vincent, like you said, it's about the community. They kind of share and they care for each other. My experience has been positive as people have welcomed me. As a teacher, having grown up in India, I had different education experiences, and I was able to relate to a lot of the communities that were out here, especially on the west side. And I remember in my second or third year, there were students who'd come from Fiji, and they only spoke Hindi and Indian language. And at that time, I was their connection, and I didn't realize that. But just knowing that they had people here who they could connect with, and it wasn't just me; it was all the teachers and educators at Garfield, who at that time kind of made the students feel welcome. So I think Long Beach and Long Beach Unified particularly really believes in all means all, and they really care about the students. And I see that as the curriculum leader, I kind of go to a lot of schools. I get to visit a lot of students and be in a lot of classrooms, and I see that across the board. So, and I love being with this group that's out here.
Yeah, I said the same thing yesterday, but I feel like as a reporter, I get into these to moderate these conversations, and I come out feeling like, okay, I've got about 3 months worth of stories that I need to find some time to get to, you know. Okay, we have a few people that we haven't heard from yet, and so I want to shift the conversation a little bit to talk about. We've heard about you guys and sort of the diversity of your experience, but I'm curious for some of your thoughts on the diversity of the API student experience and what as educators can kind of be done to support that. And if Czarina, you don't mind sort of kicking us off on that, that would be great.
Sure. So thinking back on my experience as a student, so I'm Filipina, and growing up, I was one of many at my school. So I definitely can acknowledge that I'm lucky to not have grown up in school feeling isolated from like a cultural community that I identify with. But then also because of that, on the flip side, because I was one of many, I kind of got swept along with my classmates who were just incredibly intelligent, incredibly driven, while I was struggling with academics. And so for me, when I think about my experience as an Asian American student growing up and what it looks like for me now as a teacher working in a school with very similar demographics. Another like good number of our school population demographic are kids who are API. It's reminding myself that like essentially like not to fall prey to like the model minority myth and thinking that, oh, like all of these Asian kids, they're completely fine right now. Oh, they're all so smart. They're all so good at academics. Like, and reminding myself like, no, they are individuals with individual experiences and individual challenges and struggles. And I need to see them that way because I honestly do wish that I had teachers who would stop and be like, hey, you need a little bit more help with this. Like, let me help you, because I struggled with like a good number of classes, and I also struggled with my self-worth because of it, because so much of my identity was like hinged on the idea that I was smart because of all of my friends being the smart Asian kids. And I know like talking to them afterwards, like they also had their own internal struggles too with perfectionism and all of these things because of that stereotype. And so for me as an educator, it's really keeping that in mind.
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, you know, racism and stereotypes have so many different kind of insidious ways that they can affect people, especially kids, right? And people might not hear a positive, you know, quote unquote positive stereotype and think about the negative effect that that can have on you, right? I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. Michael, you've been principal at a couple different schools in very different Long Beach neighborhoods. What are your thoughts on, you know, this idea of how we support sort of the different experiences of the API students?
Sure, yeah. First of all, I have to say, George and I worked together many years ago at Coverly, and I want your picture, George. I'd like to frame that and put it in my office. Pretty amazing. Thank you. So my background is I grew up in Gardena as well until 3rd grade, and there were as I think most of you know, Gardena had some diversity, but I moved to Orange County, and it was quite culture shock for me, where I was one of the very few Asian students, one of the few Filipino. As I grew older, there were more Vietnamese students that had moved in, but younger, it was just me and just a few other families. So I grew up with mostly white students, and I didn't really know that it was a difference until I started getting older. And, you know, and I think unfortunately, like George saw a little bit of racism. I'd be walking down the street and I'd be yelled at, like, you know, go home. And I kind of look around like, well, I am home. I don't understand what that meant. I didn't understand what that meant. I never wanted any of our students, whether they were in Long Beach or my own children, to ever feel that way. I remember when I first started teaching, my first assignment was at Marshall, and I taught ELD. It was called ELD at the time. And the majority of my students obviously were brown students. They were either Hispanic or Asian, mostly Cambodian students. And I remember thinking at the time that I wanted them to have a different experience that I did, that they were included, that they were important, that regardless of their background, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, that they were very, very valued. And I could feel that in a way, and I don't know that I understood it being really young as a teacher when I first started. But we connect, my students and I connected immediately, and we talked a lot about that, the ethnicity piece. And, you know, I don't know, and I think probably many of you didn't, I don't think that most of our students had a Asian male as their teacher. So I think we do a good job at attempting to even the playing field that way. I think obviously, just like anything, we can do more, but being in many different schools, I see that diversity in Long Beach, and it just keeps on getting better and better. And with this group, thank you for having me be a part of it. I'm very honored. I think it's gonna do a lot for many of our students.
You just mentioned kind of, we'll return to this idea about students in a minute, but I think you just brought up an important point that I want to ask a couple of our panelists about. which is every study that's ever been done shows that it's beneficial to students to see people who look like them in leadership positions at their school, whether that's in the classroom or the administration. So my question for you guys, and we have some people obviously who are in the business of doing this work, how do we make education more inclusive and bring in people who haven't necessarily been a part of the education and education administration historically? Kelly, do you mind kind of kicking us off on that?
Sure, Mike. And I just want to echo what Ruth had said too. I appreciate being invited to be a part of this panel. It's an honor to come alongside all of you in this work. I think that in order to make education more diverse and inclusive, I see just two components that I want to talk about today. The first is seeing education as a career path, meaning how can we continue or connect this more to high school pathways? So a focus on education and employment. I think that opportunity to have that pathway, we're very fortunate in Long Beach to have different pathways. And so how do we also create a pathway around education that leads to employment for our students? They need to see that possibility and what that looks like and sounds like to have a career in education. And the other piece that I think we can do to make education more diverse and inclusive is to really address our own implicit biases. To have awareness about our own implicit bias and how that impacts and the impact that has on our relationships and the work that we do, but it's also to share with others just knowledge about API and what that means through our stories, through the work that we do, through how we model and carry ourselves in our work. I'll just say I think those are the two things that come to the forefront of my mind at this time.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Sam, do you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So just like Vanita mentioned earlier, I actually got experience working in an Indian educational system. That's where I grew up. And then as an immigrant, I moved to the US. So I got to experience both educational systems. So when I think about it, I think about my own experiences coming here and what it meant for me. And so I think it's important, like a lot of us have said here, that it's important. Representation makes a difference. It's important for us to see people like us in front of the classroom and leading that classroom, because growing up, I didn't have that role model, right? And so when you think about what does it mean to have someone in front of the classroom that looks like you, I actually originally, so my undergraduate was in astrophysics, but before then I actually wanted to be an English major. So I went to Santa Monica College. I wanted to be an English major, but within one of my classes, I looked like a very disengaged student, and the teacher or the professor didn't understand that it was because I couldn't access some of the classroom discussions. He couldn't understand the background I was coming from. And I think that's one of the things I bring into the classroom as an educator, is that inclusivity, because you automatically have gone and experienced some of these adversities that your students are probably going through. And it makes a difference to have that understanding so that you can actually make your classroom a little more inclusive. And then in my role right now, working at the district level or even at the site, you think about it as an institution. What are some of the systemic barriers, right? So George gave me an idea. I was going to paint a picture with my words, but I think it's easier to show you a picture instead. Most of us in education have seen this picture, the difference between equality versus equity, right? Like not everyone needs the same thing, but I think if you look at another version of this, that's a family trying to watch a ball game, but there's a fence in the way. And you can think about that fence as an institutional barrier. So what can we do to remove the barrier? Because if there's a chain link fence instead of that fence, you can actually increase access whether or not what the height of the person is or what the needs of that person is. And so when I think about institutional ways we could do that, I think about some of the moves, because I'm the director of assessment and research, but I went to Santa Monica College because I couldn't access the SATs. It wasn't even an option for me. I never took it. And so I went into a community college, and in hindsight, it was a great move. I love my education there. I got a lot out of it. But I see the UC system, for example, making moves such as making ACTs and SATs optional. They're not going to require actually all the way until 2024. So these kinds of systemic barriers which might have held students from being having education be accessible to them, it's really cool to see how we can impact some of those as district leaders.
Those are great thoughts. Staci, do you want to share a little bit?
So I was thinking about ways that things that we can do to make education more diverse and inclusive. And I think from like a middle school, elementary school perspective, bringing in diverse reads and with multiple and varied perspectives. So for me, I talked about earlier, just reading Farewell to Manzanar in middle school was a really powerful experience for me. But I was also having this conversation with my husband. We went to the same middle school, and as a Vietnamese American, he felt that his identity wasn't like an actual identity, like it wasn't a valid identity to have. And so I think that it's important to make sure that we're having conversations with students and building into the curriculum ways for students to explore their identities and have their own experiences be validated, so that students don't end up feeling my identity isn't a real one, because I've never seen anyone else at school talk about it or share that identity with me.
Angel, do you want to share?
Yes, definitely. All right. Just to echo what Staci said, bringing in culturally relevant reads for our students, so that way they see themselves and see that possibility and that career path in the future for them. We were going down this path, like a lot of the work that we did at Dooley has to do with culturally relevant literature for our students, and going down that path and looking at, okay, let's make sure we're reaching all kids and reaching all identities at our site. And then looking at my own Pacific Islander identity and looking at the books that are available, it was very few and slim to none. So we were just trying to encourage that students, you want literature that comes from you. You need to be the author. You're the author of your story. Start reaching into your culture, learn about where your family comes from, because ultimately our community needs to come together and write our stories. Nobody else can write those narratives for us. So that's one way we can validate student identity.
That's such a powerful way of approaching that problem. And I think about that quite a bit as a writer and a reporter, not from an ethnic perspective, but that's something I think about quite a bit. One of the motivating things for me as a reporter was when I was growing up, the only time you would ever see Long Beach in the news is if someone got shot. You know, I mean, there were just no positive stories. And here I'm growing up and we have these great parks and I have, you know, all these great friends and there's so many good stories here. And that motivated me, you know, from the time I was in high school to say, well, someone should tell everyone that we have a nice city here, you know. Someone should highlight some of the positive aspects of how diverse and great this city is. So I like that a lot, because when JJ and I are asked to speak with classes, we do that quite a bit. If someone says, you know, I don't see this, I don't see myself represented in sports media, and we just always say, well, you know, let's go, right? Let's take that as a inspirational thing for you to be that person who's in that role. Michael, do you have a couple more thoughts to share on this?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
We're talking about what can be done to make education sort of more diverse and inclusive.
Yeah, you know, I think it just starts in the classroom, just like everything, and you know, really letting our students know and understand that it is a career choice that they can make. And you know, the more that they see themselves in their teachers, their administrators, I know that you know, it'll open the doors for them. It's interesting because I know it's got to be difficult to you know, just on a recruiting end, you know, try to do it in that aspect. But I think, you know, just like anything is really starting with our kids, and whether it's elementary or middle or high school, is just letting them know, you know, education is a wonderful endeavor. It's so incredibly rewarding, so much fun, and we get to work with great students like all of you.
Yeah, I think you made an interesting point, and I'm forgetting who brought that up earlier, the idea of education as a pathway. That's such a good point, especially in Long Beach, where 3 of the 6 largest employers in the city are the school district, Cal State Long Beach, and OBCC, right? I mean, this is an education town, the way that Pittsburgh might have been a steel town, right? I mean, that is really the economic driver in our city. So a question that a couple of you said you wanted to talk about, sort of linked to this, is what can be done to support API in education and leadership roles specifically? And Darlene, you have thoughts you want to share on how school districts or colleges, or, you know, all public education institutions can kind of help foster that?
Yeah, you know, I think it starts with just building more support for the API community, for people who are interested in education. That starts with, you know, forming a small group or mentorship programs where people can connect with one another and not feel so alone. I know growing up, one of the common stereotypes that I heard a lot was like, you know, my parents wanting me to be a doctor or go for something in the medical field. And I just felt like education wasn't as like praised enough. And it is such an important, you know, career path and field to study. And I was lucky that I had like my sister, an older sister, who was really passionate about teaching, and she's a teacher right now. So I think, you know, we were our support system. And then growing up, I was really lucky to have a school counselor that was also Cambodian, and that I can connect with and ask questions and just, you know, not feel like, you know, I didn't know anybody in the field. And I think that was a change factor for me, because I was able to, you know, really find that passion and also connect with other people who I knew about and already in that position. So.
Well, you guys obviously are valuable people to talk about this subject, because this has worked for you, right? Like, you are now a teacher. You guys have sort of followed this pathway yourselves. George, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate what other people have been saying this whole time. You know, Darlene just talking about, hey, how do we make this like a worthy career? How do we get rid of that stigma that, oh, it's not, you know, a true profession, but it is rewarding. You know, if people get invested in it and are passionate about it, it's such a worthy career. So we do need to get rid of that stigma. Those who are passionate about education, who are effective at those interpersonal relationships, who do amazing work, need to shine. So, you know, Navia, you were my first Asian American education leader, you know, like K-12, not an Asian in sight, you know, as a teacher in the classroom. It wasn't until college, and now, you know, like in K-12 leadership, you were the one. So, you know, we need those role models. The presence needs to be out there. We need to be doing outreach, coaching, mentorships, anything where they're at those impressionable ages where they're deciding on their careers. I think that needs to be done, and it just takes that collective effort.
You're touching on something Nok definitely discussed with me quite a bit when we were talking about one of her hopes for the Long Beach API is that students within the district, even if they don't have a teacher who looks like them, can see through the work that you guys are doing with the social media that those teachers are in the city and in the district administration, which I think is an interesting aspect of this work that I hadn't necessarily thought about, right? It's sort of a way of advertising as well to the community, the work that you guys are already doing. Kelly, do you have a couple thoughts on this?
Sure. I think I want to go back to something you said earlier, Mike. You actually mentioned all the research around having role models, right, in the field. I think you kind of launched that off. And so I completely agree with what George is saying. I think, I guess 3 things come to mind. The first is, yes, we need to have role models in leadership positions, but we need to be visible. And it's not just the formal coaching role, but it's also, how do we come alongside folks and be an informal mentor, a support? How do we lean on one another and really build that community up? of which NOC has started a lot of this work now. I think something else that can be done also to support API in education and leadership roles is we need to make education an attractive field. So we need to message beyond thinking just about the teacher role. Now, don't get me wrong, we need phenomenal teachers, but we need phenomenal teachers also to be part of our leadership pipeline. Because we need, hence the reason why we have leadership development in LBUSD. We want to show that possible career path in education. I think we need to tap into that. And I think the third thing is kind of building off of what George was saying is we need to also create some non-traditional partnerships between districts and universities. And so what I mean by that is, how do we connect to those at colleges who might talk to students, mentor students, and I mean, reaching out to students who aren't thinking about education as a career, but based on the relationship they have with students, they might leverage that to show them a different perspective or a lens regarding the field of education. And that's where I think those different kinds of partnerships are key as well.
Sam, do you want to close up our conversation on this?
Yeah, of course. So just kind of pretty much everyone's been saying the same thing, which is, and it's surprising because I thought it was sort of a unique experience. So I was lucky that my parents didn't pressure me into those stereotypical roles that you would find Asian Americans going into. But I did have family members who definitely did a double take and strongly persuaded me to not take education seriously. And so hearing Darlene talk about her experience and George and even Kelly talking about the impact we can have as role models is important, because honestly, teaching allowed me to be creative. I genuinely enjoyed being able to teach physics. I took great pleasure in making hard to understand concepts and making it comprehensible, right? So when teaching, I was either building something or exploring novel ways to introduce a concept to my students. And it's not to knock any profession, it's just what was a better fit for me. So I would have been very bored as a medical doctor, but being in education allowed me the opportunity to make an impact in a way that's meaningful to me. And so another thing I constantly think about is also the way you would support API in education is you also want to think about your hiring practices. So thinking about that leadership pipeline, because I read an article in Business Insider that kind of stuck with me for a long time. And basically it was, the author was talking about how she has been a hiring manager for over 10 years, and she actually wouldn't make a job offer to any applicant who does not follow up with a thank you email, right? So if you think about it, to her, to this person, this thank you email represented a proxy for soft skills. But however, it's a good way to build a workforce of mostly people privileged enough to grow up with the same norms. And it's really important for us to be intentional in our hiring practices and also understand what our unconscious bias may be. And we need to put in words to kind of counter that. And so think about some of the things, like my wife currently is on the job market, and thank you emails are hard, especially if you think about a panel interview where you go into a room, you likely don't know most of the people in the room. How do you get their names in a high pressure situation, let alone remember everyone to then send a thank you email later down the line? And so if something doesn't have to do with the core skills and ability to excel in the job, then we need to be cognizant of what proxies we are using and discard applications, right? That's just not fair, because all it does is it inevitably disadvantages applicants from non-traditional backgrounds. And we also need to look at what research shows, following blind hiring practices to reduce unconscious bias, implementing team-based hiring so that you're removing hiring decisions from a single manager. So things like this that would help build a better pipeline, and being cognizant of our bias, I think will go a long way in supporting API further.
That's well said. Yeah, I feel like I'd be less likely to hire. I would throw away the applications from the people who sent me the needless follow-up email. You know, it's like, I'm busy and you're busy. Let's skip this stuff. Okay, we're going to come back to the idea of the diversity of the API experience within the students and what can be done to kind of support them. And I'd like to hear from Thao, if you don't mind.
I'm speaking from experience when I talk about what I think students need, and I think that's relationships and how that specific student family functions. Because like growing up, I had 4 older brothers, and I was the youngest, and I was the only girl. So not only did I have to do my schoolwork, but I had to come home and I had to help my mom sew, and I had to cook dinner, and then I had to take care of my dad because he was disabled. But just knowing your students' lives, and actually, before I move on, is pronouncing their name correctly. My name has been butchered a lot, and I had a teacher that no matter how many times I corrected her, she still pronounced my name wrong, and then everyone started pronouncing my name wrong because they thought it was funny, and I absolutely hated that. But when you have a teacher that takes the time to get to know you and your name and your family, I feel like that means the world to me, whether you are Asian or you're Caucasian or African American, just getting to know the students. And I also think that we as educators need to talk about the uncomfortable situations. Like I'm going through and I'm telling students, let's stop. We're not going to do a math lesson today. We're going to talk about what happened, and just really putting that out there, because it goes back to relationship. And a lot of what I learned in leadership is that the trust has to be there in the classroom or nothing will be accomplished. So just stressing relationships is what I think.
Stressing relationships is great, but I would also just follow up as a journalist who does highlight videos of a very diverse population in Long Beach. We work really hard because my last name is Guardabascio and it has never been pronounced correctly, by someone who didn't know. We work very hard on that because I'm always, every year, continuously reminded of how much that means to people, right? Particularly in Long Beach, I think Polynesian kids and Cambodian kids, I know, just basically don't ever hear an effort from people to pronounce their names correctly. And I know the first time I talked to Sefo Mikaele, he said, "You're the first white guy that didn't call me Sifo," in my whole life. And it's like, I think that's such an important thing. And I love that when you hear a teacher that says, that asks, "How do I pronounce your name?" instead of just sort of throwing out, whatever it is. Okay, Tuan, do you want to talk a little bit about how we support students?
It reminds me of, this phrase here, treat others the way that you want to be treated. And of course, the platinum rule is treat people the way they want to be treated. And I think it goes full circle with the difference between the individualized community versus the communal community, where family comes first. And it reminds me of, one of our sayings at the very beginning of the school year: how are the children? And with that, even going back to what Tal was talking about, and even with Vince, those relationships that you are building. And even for myself, why did I get into education? Was it an Asian male that I saw? No, it was a male white man who treated me like a human being. And that relationship that he built, he wasn't even my cross-country coach. In fact, it's Joe Carlson, and he was one of my mentors. And for him to treat us like, we are of equal status, that went a long way for me. And for me to see someone in education who cared, who took the time and provide us with just advice, even open up his home on the weekends when we had those cross-country meets. He would invite all of his students over, and we would have a spaghetti, a carb buildup so that we could have for those races. But those are the memories that stuck with me. And I associated Joe Carlson as an educator. I'm like, dude, if this cool guy is part of education, there's something special about this. So for me, it goes back to the relationship building. And even within our district, we have U6, which is how do we build those relationships with our staff, our students. And I think also, most importantly, how do we build those relationships with our parents? Because as we know, in the certain affluent neighborhoods, parent participations, it's going to be there. But thinking of even our parents, you know, they never went to school. In fact, all they did was send us to school and had this expectation in the school that the school would do right for us. So with that, I think about that responsibility weighing on us every single day. And I still remember in my first year activities director at Cabrillo, and this was probably like 6 weeks prior to prom. And so application, and so students were submitting their application and what have you. And I remember Daniel, he came in the very next day, and he had this very off body language. In fact, throughout the whole school year, very vibrant, outgoing, very social kid. He was part of a yearbook, so he took pictures, so very lively kid. But the day he came into my office, I knew something was just off. And I said, Daniel, is everything okay? And he looked up at me and he goes, hey, Mr. Nguyen, may I run for prom queen? And of course, everything ran through my mind. I'm like, geez, this question just landed on my desk, my first year as activities. But I went back to my heart and I said, he's been waiting to ask this question for such a long time. And for me to make him wait and deny response, I think that would have been equally hurtful. So with that, I opened up my mouth and I said, Daniel, you may absolutely run for prom queen. So with that, the very next day, a girl comes in, Mr. Nguyen, may I run for prom king? I'm like, absolutely. But fast forward to prom night, his application was accepted by the committee. And that night, his senior class spoke very loudly, and the senior voted him for prom queen. And with that, you know, he came back very next year. Hey, Mr. Nguyen, I have my tiara on my shelf. So with that, how do we build those relationships with the students, with our parents? And as we know, we can say all kinds of things, but I think people remember most how we make them feel. So with that, it is a great responsibility, and definitely goes back to U6 in terms of building those relationships. And every single day when I step onto Nelson Academy, it's how do I build relationship with my staff, with my parents, with the kids, and even with our school site council. I met this, we have a Cambodian mother, and she reminds me of my mom. And with that, it's, you know, is there a language barrier? Absolutely. But despite her speaking Khmer, me speaking Vietnamese and English, but we still communicate in that bond in terms of, you know what, we're here for one another. So I think it just goes back to having that heart. And so it's a big task, but how do we provide those relationships for all?
Very, very well said. I do want to note that we are at 6 o'clock. I'm gonna, if anyone needs to leave, we totally understand that. Unless Knock is gonna cut me off here, I would like to just finish up. I think in the next 5 to 10 minutes, we've got a few more questions because I want to make sure I get to everyone twice. Vincent, can you share a little bit about you know, what we've been talking about with how we support students throughout the diverse API experience?
Yes, definitely. Talk about, you know, having your question like put on a platter and, you know, everyone else scaffolding to it, and, you know, here's your question, serving for it, right?
You and I have only spent about like 5 hours talking about this.
Right, everything that's going on with the community. I mean, you know, everything that you guys all mentioned, it really hits home. You know, I think one of the things that really I can follow up on is when Kellyanne said, you know, as far as like education, how can we make education a pathway to employment, right? And I think the elephant in the room in the API community is, you know, you have communities like the Cambodian community where you have folks, and you know, the PI community, you have folks who are struggling just to get a high school degree, and then you have folks who are like, I'm going to be a doctor, engineer, I'm working for NASA, and so on. So there's this huge gap between each group, right? And how do we get them to understand that there's employment in different sectors, right? And I would say you would do that through someone like our very own Ngoc Nguyen, who I would say, what, a couple of months ago, Ngoc, you took a couple of our former students at Poly, and you did the community cleanup on the West Side. And Catherine, our former ASB president, was like, hey, you know, I'm helping out Ms. Nguyen, and, you know, we're going to go out on the West Side. I'm like, bro, you don't even live on the West Side. Why are you over there helping out? She's like, Ms. Nguyen is teaching me about service. And then how that translates is she tells her parents, I want to get into education, and this is how I can get a career and make a living off of service. And so meeting the needs of our students is getting our families to understand that education is not about you're going to be a doctor, and if you don't make it as a doctor, then good luck, try to find a job somewhere else. It's like there's different pathways that you can take, parents, and you can support them in getting towards those goals, right? And I think that's really important in meeting the needs of our students is, you know, if we're going to come as a group as, you know, API educators, is to teach them that there's different pathways that they can take in life, and that the parents should support it as if they were going to med school, right? Go all in. You know, your child wants to be, you know, the next superintendent of Long Beach Unified, or they want to be, you know, the next CEO of T-Mobile. Go all in for them, right? As if they were trying to be the next doctor at St. Mary's Hospital. And I think that's huge in getting our parents and our families to understand that there's different sectors, and their parents are very essential in buying in. Because the reality is, and we all know this, is if you go to, like Tuan mentioned, if you go to the affluent areas, you know, there's not a question. There's no doubt, right? Families and parents are supporting the kids. If you are going to take 10 years off to explore yourself, mom and dad's cheering you on if you're in an affluent area regardless, right? And the sad part is you don't get that same commitment from parents in struggling communities, and with even API communities, because we're so diverse, and trying to get that connection with them. So I think that's the challenge that we have as API educators, is to find a way to you know, meet that challenge that Kellyanne was talking about. How can we get that education to employment, and to really get the parents to buy into the different pathways that exist out in this world?
I would love to have been there if you told your mom you were going to take 10 years off to explore yourself.
Oh man, didn't happen.
Absolutely. Okay. The question we're going to close on that I'd like to hear from a couple people about is, what does advocacy look like in your role? We obviously have people in a lot of different jobs here. And again, we're a little over our time. If anyone needs to leave, I understand that. But Vanitha, do you mind talking about what advocacy looks like in your role?
Absolutely, Mike Gardaba. Sorry, I was trying to say your name. Guardabascio. Sorry about that. Totally ruined it. I was trying to make a point.
Mike G is perfectly acceptable. It's all good.
So the reason I was trying to make a point is because my last name is kind of really not easy either. So I was trying to make a point and I totally blew it. But I think the biggest thing is the relationships. Everybody has talked about the relationships. And that's how one of the ways that once we make connections with our students by getting to know them, understanding them, and even with the people around us, with the community, we have to be advocates for our students, for our careers, for our education system. Sam mentioned this before, and Darlene did too, that as people from the API community, a lot of times education is not something that parents want their kids to be. They want them to be engineers and doctors and scientists and computer engineers and stuff, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if we make connections with our students, show them the power of being an educator, show them the power of how you can make a difference, I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to do. But it starts with the relationships, the connections, and with every student in your class, and with at the district level, making connections with the education community so that we can help our students wherever they are and whatever they want to do.
Ruth?
Sure. So much has been said on this topic, so I'll try not to repeat anything, but I can't emphasize enough the power of relationships, but it has to be built on trust. And to be an ally with the API community is important to me, as I know it is to so many others. And I'll just give an example, because the first thing that came to my mind is somebody like Ngoc, exactly Ngoc. because I knew her when she was, I believe, a senior. She was a ASB president, I think 2 years in a row. And she was a student board member. And then I was so excited when she applied to be a teacher for the district, and then watching her grow throughout the years. And every once in a while she'd come back to me, and that's what I truly want, is somebody to have that trust where she could ask questions, ask for advice, but just as importantly, I always want somebody to push back. And when she says, Ruth, you know what, something doesn't feel right, that doesn't feel right, that's what I want. Somebody to have a voice, somebody to stand up and advocate for others, and knowing that I could have a relationship with somebody who works so closely with students, then I know I would have, then I know that I've done a good job, hopefully. So that's what I feel in being an advocate for our kids.
You make a good point that we have several former ASB presidents who have then gone on to work in activities on the panel. And I think that's worth noting as well, that in addition to being a counselor, being a teacher, working in administration, you know, cross-country coaches, ASB teachers, right? There's so many different ways to kind of interact with kids and show them these different pathways to employment. Daro, do you want to talk a little bit about the role of advocacy for you?
Sure, yeah, real quickly. One of the things that I'm known among my colleagues in the district for is surveys. So, you know, right now we've launched, you know, some really important surveys to really get a pulse among the community, among all our stakeholder groups, students, teachers, and parents, to see, you know, what the challenges are during this pandemic, during the school closures. And so, you know, the work on these surveys and a lot of the surveys we do year round are just really essential in helping to drive those, you know, critical conversations that are happening at the school sites. And so I feel like, you know, even though I don't really interface with parents and teachers and students as much as my colleagues do, I feel like my role is really to support the advocates. And so, you know, with that being said, like it's just really important to make sure that we, you know, make sure that the data is accessible, that there's a lot of, you know, the data can stand on its own, the integrity of the data, so that it can speak for itself, but not only that, but helping the advocates to speak about the data, to interpret the data, to unpack it in a responsible way, in a culturally responsible way. So for example, you know, one of the things we measure is growth mindset. So, you know, when we look at some of the numbers around growth mindset across different subgroups, you know, we have to remind ourselves that, you know, one score in one subgroup might look similar to another subgroup, but you know, there's a lot that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, they are experiencing the same challenges, the same successes. So, you know, we want to make sure that there's a lot of data governance and ownership and proper use of data.
I'm really happy to hear you say that. First of all, I filled my panorama survey out about 10 seconds after I got it. And I said, take these kids, please, in whatever form you can in September. But you make a good point. I mean, I've read a number of articles and studies that, you know, AI algorithms can essentially be racist because of the data that has been put into them, right? And so I think you make a good point that as education becomes more and more data-based, there's a real responsibility to make sure that the data is collected and interpreted correctly and that you're asking the right questions, right? Okay. Okay, well, we're going to end with Czarina with your thoughts on advocacy, and then I'll just share a few parting words and we'll get everyone off to dinner. So Czarina?
All right, if I could sum it up with a sentence or a quote, there's a quote from Larry Itliong, who is a labor organizer, worked across racial lines with Cesar Chavez. And I can't say the whole quote, there's bad words in it, which is hilarious to me. But the end of the quote is, you've got to make that come about. They're not going to give it to you. And so when I think of advocacy and I think of what everyone's been talking about in regards to relationships and building community and all of this, it's not a one and done thing. Advocacy is something that we have to make it come about. We have to continue building relationships. We have to continue connecting with our families, with our students, with each other, with our colleagues, with our admin. And it has to be a consistent, ongoing process, essentially. And also when we think of advocacy, it really is, it's to me, I've been coming back to the phrase compassionate challenging, where I I am going to have to go against the grain sometimes. I am going to have to speak up when I see something that doesn't sit well with me. But I also want to make sure that I am speaking and coming with empathy alongside that truth that I'm bringing. And that in itself will only, you know, strengthen and grow a relationship that's already been, you know, solidified and healthy. And so I think as we just continue moving forward, and this community is amazing. I'm like so fangirling over all of you. Wow. Just to continue placing that front and center, and our students will definitely benefit from it.
Okay, before I close up, I believe Nak, which is the person who asked me to do this, and obviously one of the movers in the Long Beach API, Nak wanted to say a few words as well.
Hi, everyone. You haven't seen me behind the scenes as I've been crying in tears as you're speaking. I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I respect all of you so much. And as we talk about the power of relationships, it's really what it is, right? And me having some relationship with you for you to be here is incredible. And I just want to acknowledge how important mentorship is, and it's been mentorship for me when I was a student in LBUSD, at Garfield, Newcomb, and at Poly, that in my life of trajectory of me becoming an educator has actually been because of so many educators in our district who had sought me out and said, hey, Nak, I think you'd be a great teacher. Hey, Nak, when I retire, you're gonna take over my job as an activities director. Hey, Nak, I think you should apply for future admin. And it's something that's really I've taken on, that because I've received so much support, that I've been very intentional about my words with my students and my relationships with my students, because I've had so many mentors who sought me out, and now it's my role to really seek out these students and build them up. So I just am in awe in all of you and all of your work, and just love you all, and thank you so much for being part of this discussion. It means the world to me.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Nak. I'm very happy and inspired to hear everything you guys said. Please follow along with the Long Beach API on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. They're very thorough on social media as we move to close up the API Heritage Month here in the next couple of days. But I just want to say thank you as a parent. You know, I've got two kids that are, one of them's in the district, one of them will be going in a year. And my kids are Italian from me, but they're also Japanese and Black from my wife. And it's just so nice and amazing to hear from so many educators. And I would just add on a personal note, so many young educators as well, to see that so many people are moving into the school district and continuing the great work of making this the place that we all love to live and work. So thank you so much to everyone who shared your thoughts. You guys were incredible. Thanks to everyone who followed along on Facebook. Thank you to Lori Andrews. I'm sorry we didn't get to your question, but I think I'm 20 minutes late already. So thank you so much. And thanks for having me. Keep following along with the Long Beach API.